Good afternoon. My name is Tiana Smith, representing Ag Plus here today. We're getting to the end of harvest at the moment in the macadamia season, and most of the other crops and most of the other horticultural crops that we've got, including citrus and avocados. And one of the critical things that you need to do post-harvest is apply gypsum. So we often get asked, why would we apply gypsum? And it's actually fairly straightforward. Applying gypsum is critical for the simple reason that you need calcium. And calcium is one of the most important macro elements that you need in the soil. It's very important for keeping soil structure, and also important in fruit filling and cell division as well as cell structure. So, and the most important part for it is that you can only take up calcium through mass flow. So that it needs to be an active root tip growing into the soil that intercepts the calcium directly. And you can imagine it's like a plant drinking from a calcium milkshake. That would be the only way you can get calcium into the plant. You can also try foliar feeds, etc., but the calcium molecule itself is quite big and doesn't translocate well in orchards or in trees in general. So when we come to apply calcium, there's various ways you can do that. The most common way to do that is through gypsum. Gypsum is the most inexpensive form of calcium, but at the end of the day, not all gypsum is created equally. So today I brought two different types of gypsum. Your normal sub 3 mil screen gypsum, which is a bulk type of gypsum, and then a micronized gypsum. And the idea is to show you what the big difference is between the two gypsums. So the first gypsum that I've got is a bulk screen gypsum, pretty much mined straight in Australia. The gypsum is fairly fine, as you can see. Most likely it has the consistency of sand to it, and the idea is we'll take a little square, maybe 1 square meter. I'll take this gypsum and I'll try and show you how we spread it, and once it gets spread, I'll compare that to micronized gypsum and we'll go from there. So if we take an area here that I'm going to spread this in, we're going to take 1 square block, like just a little square here, which is roughly, call it 1/2 meter by 1/2 meter square, somewhere in that range. And I'm going to take this gypsum and I'll just slightly spread it as if a fertilizer spreader or a gypsum spreader is spreading this. And that's pretty much roughly the equivalent of about a ton to the hectare in that little square there. So as you can see, once we get closer to this gypsum, you can see a lot of the particles are spread across the field, across this little square, but there's quite a lot of open space in between it. And although this is fine, each of these particles will need to get dissolved by water, and once it gets dissolved by water, it'll wash into the soil. And the solubility of gypsum, as most people would know, is very, very low. It's not a very soluble product. So particle size really becomes important. What I'll do now is I'll swap this over for micronized gypsum. And as you can see, it's a lot whiter, it's very fine, and I'll take it out. It's almost like talcum powder when we look at it. It's a very, very fine gypsum, and just if you look at fingers, it sits on your fingers as a very, very fine particle. So when we draw the same square right next to it, which is exactly the same size, and we take this gypsum and start spreading it at exactly the same rate, which is usually applied with water, but if we do this at exactly the same rate, it looks like icing sugar that's actually being applied to the soil. And we'll talk about why this is important. But if we compare the two, which is the Entra gypsum and the the normal bulk spread gypsum, you could see that it's a lot more uniform spreading. And the other part of this is that there is a big difference in the amount of area covered by a lesser volume of micronized gypsum compared to bulk spread gypsum. And the reason this is so important is if we look at something like sugar, which we can all relate to, normal sugar or granulated sugar can be compared to bulk gypsum, whereas microfine gypsum can be compared to icing sugar. And you can ask anyone, what is sweeter? Is normal sugar sweeter or icing sugar sweeter? And at the end of the day, both of them actually have the same amount of sweetness, but icing sugar tastes a lot sweeter. And the reason icing sugar tastes a lot sweeter is because the particle size are a lot smaller, and because the particles are a lot smaller, the surface area on your tongue makes it taste sweeter. And that's exactly what you'll get from gypsum as well, microfine gypsum versus bulk spread gypsum. So the other main reason why we use gypsum, especially the micronized gypsum, which is highly soluble, is for the management of salts. So salts typically in the form of sodium, sodium being a positively charged ion in the soil. We combat that by putting a lot of calcium in there. Calcium's a bit of a bully and can push sodium out of the soil profile. It's usually important for very salt-sensitive crops like avocados and citrus as well. We do that by applying the micronized gypsum and adding a heap of water to flush the salts out of the system. We do see similar results with bulk gypsum, but the reactivity of the bulk gypsum is so low that most of the time the sodium and the effects that salt stress or sodium stress has on the plants becomes problematic before the gypsum can solve the problem. So using a microfine gypsum such as the gypsum, which we've shown, can alleviate a lot of the salt stress problems that we have.